The Mitch Lafon and Jeremy White Show.
The Mitch Lafon and Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.
Catch up on past interviews and episodes on demand now.
Subscribe so you don't miss any of it.
Look, let's get right into this. Bryan Adams, So Happy It Hurts World Tour, officially in full swing, going to be hitting a whole bunch of Canadian cities this late summer, early fall, hitting Montreal in September. Tickets on sale at evenko.ca, also ticketmaster.ca for tickets to city near you. Also pick up So Happy It Hurts, available now wherever you get your music. We're absolutely thrilled to be talking to the one, the only, the Canuck icon himself. Some would say the unsung hero, but he's a legend in my books. And we finally got him on the show, Keith Scott.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. What amazes me is that you have played on, your riffs are on so many classic rock staples run to you. Summer of '69. And just quickly talk to me about that, knowing that you've been on so many massive singles and massive hits, because, sometimes when they put together the best guitarist list and all, they list Yngwie Malmsteen and stuff, but they don't list you necessarily. And quite frankly, you should be top 10 on every list.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of you to say that. Maybe we have to look at how we evaluate who is, whatever that is, good or, who's better than others. And,
yeah.
I think the obvious focus for most people is, their virtuosity. And that's always been top of the priority for how they rate people. So, I'm given a certain area to work with a really great singer named Bryan, and whatever I've contributed has been kind of determined by what material I've given, and simplicity has always worked best in that case. Prior to working with Bryan, I was in a band in the West Coast, and it was interesting because I got to learn to write material based around what I wanted to play in, like solos and that, which I think is a great place to start as a guitar player. So I would write these horrible songs, but they had a really great middle eight I could play over and solo and learn to play over changes. And it was kind of selfish, but the song suffered, but I really enjoyed that. And it was infinitely more complex than what Bryan did. So going from that into Bryan was quite a lesson, and learning to support a whole other entity, which is a popular song. And given that, and you have to remember, a lot of what Bryan recorded, he initiated at the demo stage. So I would go over, Jim Valance had a studio in his base. I would go to their house in the early years, in the early 80s, and they'd copped up some song. They'd come put your 2 cents on. And then generally, whatever I did at that stage, or whatever Bryan did, because he would play some, that would kind of remain as the template to work from. So it was a collaborative thing, but at the same time, a lot of it was spontaneous, and whatever went down the demo was hard to get away from. So the solos and whatever songs, It's Only Love and all that, were done at the demo stage. It was pretty close to what was done there. I just tried to copy as best I could with hopefully a better sound.
Who was playing those solos on the demos? Was it Bryan or was it Jim?
Both of us. A lot of it, the sort of shredding things were me. Bryan was more about the melodic things. So he would come up with the whole melody thing for One Night Love Affair was all kind of him. Mm-hmm. But I think played the solo, or he might have played the top line. It would kind of go back and forth. And as time went on, I got more responsibility that way. So.
Right. Was it sort of like him developing a trust for you to say, like, okay, now you got free reign to play your solo? Or it sounds like he was a bit controlling in that sense.
It's more about certain songs had a specific melody in mind, and other ones were because of what we were doing at the time. So we were playing in arenas. We started out supporting arena acts, so Foreigner, Journey. And as we got out there, we understood what was necessary to keep people interested. It wasn't just a pop song. You had to kind of make a show. And being a virtuoso kind of idea was becoming more required. So I would go up there and shred away at things like Kids Want to Rock or things like that, which we basically stole the whole energy from Billy Idol. It was, from Rebel Yell. That was a really influential record for us to try to get the next step, to try and get people interested in the energy, because I got involved for You Want It, You Got It. I wasn't part of that recording. That was before me. But we understood that the material was perhaps a little bit light for what we were doing. We had to move into a bigger energy. And like we talked about the Aerosmith show
Right.
in Montreal. And we realized that to get to the next level of energy, we had to be more like that, and be more forceful and just, more rock and roll, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
all right. Let me start you there, because we mentioned that off air. I saw you the first time in February of '83 on a bill with Anvil and Aerosmith.
In the Montreal Forum, right?
In the Montreal Forum, which was fascinating because Anvil was red light, smoke, orange light, and and then Bryan in a white button-down shirt and jeans, and then it was the most bizarre show I've ever seen, but it was fantastic.
Diversity of it.
But a couple of years later, in '85, I see you again at the Forum. 2 shows sold out, headlining. Talk to me about that time where you're opening for Aerosmith, and then literally 2 years later, you become the biggest thing in Canada. When did you start noticing that things were turning from being the opening act to being the act? Was there a moment where suddenly a song hit and you went, oh shit, buckle up tight because it's going to be one bumpy ride? Or how did you... Because those 2 years went really fast. I mean, you were unknown basically when I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of reasons, and we often reflect on it because there's a lot to reflect too. There's just so much there, and I try to explain it in the simplest terms, in that it was a time where a lot of opportunity was presented. First of all, in Bryan's case, he'd already established himself as a songwriter. He was writing for everybody, and he wanted to be an artist. And people probably don't know this, but he was signed to A&M Records in Canada at the time as a publishing person, not an artist. And he had to really beg them to convince them to put him on the roster as an artist. And they really weren't that keen. They didn't really feel he was a long-term artist. So he finally got them to agree. We started doing the recordings. As we started to open up for people in the United States, especially, you understood that it required a certain energy, like I was trying to explain.
Right.
And he had to rethink it. He started rethinking his material he was writing. Okay, this is the kind of material I should be writing. So he already had a template for the writing style, because he was writing for people like, Kiss and the Blue Oyster Cult, and Run to You, I believe, was given to Blue Oyster Cult, and they rejected it, so we used it. So there's just a lot of that, like people, they don't really know. Or they record it and we went and re-recorded it anyway. So, and we started to see that. Plus, at that time in the early 80s, MTV had just taken hold. The ramp time for you take 3 or 4 records when the record company kind of build up your reputation.
Right.
If you were lucky enough to keep writing and have songs that would continue to have success and all that. So, we had to kind of look at that as well. I think between 1983, we were able to open up for this band Journey, who were at the peak of their career at the time, and were doing multiple dates in big arenas, like 3-4 nights, Detroit, Chicago, Dallas, LA, everywhere across the United States. That kind of exposure was, we were really fortunate to have that at that time. And that combined with MTV. So the time period from, like you say, 1982, 83 to 85, it was kind of condensed because of all this extra help that just kind of came out of the sky. And we just happened to ride that wave. And by the time The Reckless came out, Bryan was smart enough, Jim was smart enough to understand what kind of material it took to get to that next level. And when Reckless came out, it was all done on the fly. And I reiterate this story because... And Bryan and I did an interview in Scotland last month with some people there, radio, and we talked about. He said we'd have a couple of days off in America somewhere. We'd sit in the hotel and relax. Bryan would get on the first flight he could, fly back to Vancouver, write a couple songs with Jim for for himself or whoever, fly back on the tour. So his work ethic was like off the charts. He understood what it took to keep the whole machine going, that you had to keep pushing, reevaluating what you're doing.
Yeah.
And between him and Jim's a superb musician and a super intelligent guy and focused. So between the two of them, they really had a really good hold of it. They understood what it took. So I think it was a lot of that. It was a combination of a bunch of elements all together hence the rapid rise in popularity and all that. So
how were you getting those tours? Because you had Foreigner 4, you had Journey, I guess it was Frontiers. I mean, these were some of the biggest acts at the time, and you were essentially, and I think you'll agree, unknown, really. And here you are opening for the two melodic rock giants of the day.
Yeah, you had to have a bunch of people on your side. First of all, your management, and the key player in that was Bruce Allen and his
Correct.
management strategy. He had been owed favors by those acts.
We like the favors. We like the favors.
Well, I think that's how it works. And the longer I've been in the business, I've been with Bryan 40 years now, and prior to that, so I'm close to a 50-year person as a performer. So you understand what it takes, in those initial years. And BTO was, of course, well prior to Bryan, had been super successful in the United States. He had acts like Journey and ZZ Top and open up for them. And so when it came time to return the favor, people like Loverboy and Bryan at the time were able to get on some important exposure tours like that. And it kind of goes in full circle. So it's kind of a business like that. And right. I noticed that about recording as well. If people that understand that, producers, they got hired as young people, and they return the favor to other people. So I've noticed that being a recording person as well. So it is kind of a handshake situation. But I have to say, Bruce Allen, the management, a record label that believes in you, promoters that will believe that you can do business for them, it's all that. An agent that will represent you and thinks he can sell you. I mean, that's another story going over to Europe, where everybody thought we were crazy to go over there in the early 80s, but it's a really big part of Bryan's success now. So.
Yeah. And let me just ask you one follow-up to that. You're not playing the bars, you're not playing the local whatever rib fest. You're out, like we said, with Journey and Foreigner. Do you learn something about the business when you see how it's organized and how it's running like a machine, and how they write their songs, and like, does any of that stuff you go, ooh, okay, if it's good enough for Neil Sean, it's definitely good enough for me?
Yeah, I mean, Neil's my age, and I watched him, record his recordings when he was 16, 17. He was in Santana. So he was a guy I really looked up to, and watching his work ethic and how he approached being a performer, how they approached being a band, the direction of the music, all that. You can't help but, if you're paying attention, and hopefully I was a little bit, it was an interesting time. I mean, if you look at the song like Heaven, which was Bryan's first #1 song in the United States, we were in the middle of the Journey tour. We recorded it, and we used Steve Smith from Journey on the drums because Mickey couldn't do it. And, we kind of used their sort of approach as a guide. And I think Neil might have said something to me, yeah, you kind of stole my thing for that song. He wasn't very happy. But that's kind of what was working at the time between bands like that, Foreigner, REO Speedwagon. You wanted to get noticed on the radio. You had to kind of fit into a slot, and that was kind of Bryan having the experience of being a writer like that. He understood that, and that song was for a film. It wasn't for a record, so it kind of became something.
Yeah,
it really did.
Let's talk about recording really quickly before I get into the whole Mutt Lange thing and all that stuff. Working with Bob on Reckless and Into the Fire. I mean, when people talk about guitar tones of the 80s, they talk about Eddie Van Halen, they talk about Richie Sambora, they talk about Neil Sean, but it's rare that anybody mentions the guitar tones of Bryan Adams records, and I think they're in the top 5 some of the greatest tones of all time. I mean, you listen to Heat of the Night and you're rivaling Stevie Ray Vaughan. You listen to the melodies and the tone of Run to You. Talk a little bit about your rigs and where were you getting your tone from at the time?
It's an interesting point, because the initial recording I did was in 1982. We started recording into the Cuts Like a Knife. Sorry. Yeah. I remember between Bryan and I, we had probably had 3 or 4 guitars and a couple of amps, and that was it. And it was, it wasn't the greatest situation. And I remember Bob Grimmountain saying, you guys probably want to think about upgrading your equipment level here, because I can get sounds, but it's so difficult. You need, you give an example. So and so comes in the studio and he's got like 5 amps and 10 guitars, and you need the flexibility. So we kind of sheepishly looked at each other. So okay, we started to do a little collecting. So hence being out with Journey and we had time off or whatever, we'd hit the music stores, try to find things. And Bob would say, try this, get this amp, get this guitar, this is it. And then it'll make your life easier. The recording process will be quicker. It's all about being efficient, so, and that's kind of where it came from. By the time we got to Reckless and Doing It a Fire, we had a small arsenal. I would say arsenal. We probably had 4 or 5 guitars each and a bunch of amps that we knew would work. So I hope that we'd progress somewhat for them. But I can tell you, Reckless, most of that stuff was borrowed or rented for the sounds.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Actually, Pat mentioned that about the drums too. He said I showed up and they just had like a rented kit. There was like a Black Beauty snare, some cymbals, and it was just the rented kit that was on the record.
Yeah. And the guitars too. Bryan had these Norland era 80s Les Pauls. I had this beat up 70s Strat that I had kind of configured like Eddie Van Halen with one pickup in it because he was the guy at the time.
Yeah.
And we rented Marshalls. Bryan had a JC-120 Roland that he used for the Django bits. We used a Music Man. We had a 50-watt Marshall. But I remember a lot of the overdubs for Reckless. We finally took the basic tracks from Little Mountain, Vancouver, and we went to New York at Power Station where Bob was kind of ensconced. And we had a rented Marshall from SIR and kind of used that for a lot of the overdubs, a couple of different guitars. We went upstairs to do an overdub for some things. I remember I borrowed Nile Rodgers' famous Strat. It was in the closet.
Oh, nice.
And things like that. We just, whatever. We borrowed this candy red 60s Strat for most of the overdubs. And the joke was in 1984, and the guy that had rented it to us, or loaned it, what he'd rented was loaned to us. And he said, you can have it for $800 because I need the money. And we passed.
What?
I know. At the time, we were not going to use it. We're going to use, we just didn't think there was not that kind of, focus or pressure to buy things like that as there is, was in the 90s. We just kept adding and adding and adding. But, but that guitar, finally, Bryan got some sense. He went and bought it a couple of years later for like 5 times the price, whatever they wanted. But it's still in his possession, and it's a great guitar. So that would have done all the solo work on It's Only Love, things like that. So it was a big piece of the recording, and a lot of it was Bryan's Les Pauls that he had from those days. The beginning, the summer of '69, was this kind of burgundy Les Paul. It was just what he bought off the shelf. There was nothing special. Just it's all about the idea.
It's funny
with a guy like Bob, he can dial in something that works.
No, completely. It's nice to hear that you guys weren't gear snobs, because so many guitar players would go into the studio and be like, no, I need this, I need this. You guys are like, oh, if it sounds good, it sounds good. We'll take it.
Yeah, because all my heroes, it was never about the instrument or the amp. It was about what their idea was, and it was in their hands. And it doesn't matter. If you have a great idea and you can hear the sound in your head, it's 9 times out of 10, it's going to come out. So, Stevie Ray Vaughan played one guitar for most of his career.
Yeah.
Everybody really. Jimmy Page only had a couple in the early. I mean, what's better than that? The early Zeppelin, mid-Zepp stuff. He just knew what to get. It's the experience of recording and an idea and riding those waves. And I firmly believe that this whole impetus on having mass collections, I mean, it's nice. I guess the interest is there, but it's not necessary to make great music.
Yeah. No, completely.
Brad Gillis is not having any part of this. He's like, I want my 87 guitars. Just quickly on Bob Rock. You're known as Bob's go-to guy, and you've appeared on a lot of records, but as a ghost. Talk to me a little bit about Bob and what he comes to you, and some of the big records he's played on, the Motley Crues and the Metallicas. Are you secretly on any of those records?
No, I wish.
Wouldn't that be nice?
You have to remember, we go back a long, long ways. We were friends first.
Right.
We became friends when I was in this club band and we were doing demos. And he had just got a job. He moved from Victoria, BC, and he got a job as a tape operator.
Right.
And he was a musician. I knew that because I brought in my rig at the time, which was a high watt, 100-watt head and Academy. He goes, "Oh, I've got a high watt," and we instantly built a friendship around the gear and the interest in that, and we stayed in touch. So, and he had his band. It's just starting to put his band together at Paola's, or Rock and Hide, whatever you want to call it. And anyway, he's remained a friend since that time, and we've always mutually respected each other. And it's only in the last maybe 10, 15 years where he's made more of an effort to hire me for things. And, I just really appreciate that. And I mean, I show up on a date and it's Lyle Workman and it's Mike Landau, or, it's somebody. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? These guys
Dan Huff's in the studio. And you're like, why am I getting called?
Yeah, no, and sadly, no, I've only met Dan, but not in a session. Rusty Anderson, people like that. Bob likes to use a real variety of people that he knows, well, you cover this part, you're going to cover this part. And it's the producer network thing. David Foster does the same thing. He always reiterates a story about when he was a young man going to LA, a guy that embraced him and introduced him to people to get work was the drummer, the great drummer that played for on the Lennon stuff and all that. I'll think of his name in a minute.
I'm trying to think.
Yeah. He just passed away too, didn't he?
No, he's around.
Oh, he's around.
He was on Joe Cocker and all that, man.
Oh yeah, can't remember his name.
I'll think of it in a sec.
Yeah.
Anyway, he did that for David. He never forgot that. So he's kind of the same. He likes to look after people. He feels like it's a payback for all whatever. I think that's the philosophy, and that's what I got from David. So again, it's a producer thing. They like to network. They like to change things around, like to have a variety of people. And I'm just lucky enough that I'm friends with Bob, and he includes me on a lot of things. Jen Arden, I did 3 records with her, 3 tours.
Cher.
Yeah, I mean, that was early on. That was Bruce Fairbairn. And Bruce Fairbairn was the same. He knew that he could get a certain thing from different people. And I before he passed away, he would call me once in a while too. So I was lucky to be in a position where I could do that. So.
Just real quick, just talk to me about the studio scene in Vancouver in the 80s, because you had guys like Mark LaFrance that would show up everywhere. You had Lou Gramm that showed up on Reckless. There just seemed to be this moment in time where Vancouver was the hottest place and all you guys sort of ended up on everybody's albums, or at least you hung out together. What was that time like? And of course, the Little Mountain Sound. And what was all that time like for you?
Well, I think that you just nailed it. The success of the studio kind of infiltrated the city, and it created an awareness. And once you have that studio, Little Mountain, become a focus for people to go make records in, and it was really starting to get popular. And I think it just kind of filters into the community, and other studios get built, and there's a lot of things that are combined to make that happen. So, honestly, in the 80s, I was rarely there. I was on tour with Brian. We were all over the place. So, but we would hear about it, and Bob would tell me, he'd say, well, we're doing this. I'm doing Metallica. I mean, it was like, okay, this is like, Bon Jovi was there. He'd come out to clubs at night. Once we'd see him hanging around.
Motley Crue was there. I mean, just everybody.
He was the guy in White Snake, John Sykes. He'd be out, making that record there. So it was a lot going on, but honestly, I was really not there to witness all the recording side. That was the periphery. But I think the initial thing was Bob going into Little Mountain and going, this is not going to work unless we do this. And there was a big square room that was the main room at Little Mountain. And my experiences there were, it was difficult to get sounds because a square box does not really, I don't know, it's a great situation.
It doesn't sound good.
It just, the sound kind of bounces around. It doesn't breathe.
Yeah.
And Bob said, I think what we should do is, there was these 2 loading doors on the side of the studio that went into this sort of concrete filled park thing that was closed.
Yeah, it was like a loading bay, I think.
The loading bay. They call it the loading bay. And so he took the drum set and he ran these panels, solid sheet metal, and made this arc into the loading bay, put 2 mics in the loading bay as a stereo room sound, compressed the heck out of it, and voila, the room sound, a giant room sound, was made even more apparent. So I think it caught the attention of people in the business, and they went, that's a pretty big sound. And then people came and they started experimenting. Of course, Bob Rock, he just went to town with it. He just had a great time. Because they went to 5. I'm going to take it to 10. And, because he's a very skilled engineer as well. So I mean, a musician, he understands it. So.
Well, that's it. I mean, you listen to the drums on like, Lovin' an Elevator, or you listen to Dr. Feelgood, and like that snare drum, it like you hear those drums, that's Little Mountain right away, or Living on a Prayer, the da 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 da, like that's the sound.
And at the time kind of created its own sort of awareness, and people like Mike Fraser and Mike Potnicott, all these guys that followed in place.
There truly is a Canadian sound. I mean, that late 80s was a Canadian sound in terms of production and style and all that stuff. I want to ask you just one thing about Bryan. Bryan has been, in a sense, it's his name on the marquee, and he's a solo guy. And a lot of solo guys, they change their players every 3 years, 5 years. But he's stuck with you, and he's stuck with Mickey, and he's stuck with Pat. Just talk to me about that relationship. Forget the business side, but just on a personal side, the fact that when he got big with Reckless and he got big with, Everything I Do and Do, he didn't say, well, now I'm going to go hire Eddie Van Halen and Steve. He stuck with the guys. I mean, talk to me a little bit about the fact that you're the guys and you're the band, and there's a loyalty, an incredible loyalty.
Yeah, I think loyalty is part of it. Family is another word we use, and there's a mutual respect. So I don't know. I mention that all the time. I said, I can't believe you hired me all these years, and he said, no, it's important. You've always added something, or something. He'll make it. He'll qualify it, somehow. Because I don't get it either. You could have anybody. You could have the Mike Landau's. You could have whoever, Yep. But I don't think he tried it, actually. In 2012, he got a proposal from David Foster to do a covers record. And we hired all these people. We had Aid Laboriel, we had Josh Fries on drums, we had all these guitar players come in, Workman, Rusty Anderson, and myself. And I think in the end, he realized that you don't need that. He didn't need that to accomplish his goal. He could use people that he was comfortable with over the years, and hence the family term. And he could reiterate what he wanted and get the result he wanted with the people that he knew without having any kind of obstacles, or I don't know. That's the only way I can possibly explain it. And loyalty is another one, I guess, and that still remains. So I think we're really, really lucky to have that as individuals and musicians.
And I think especially when you're on the road as much as you guys are, I mean, I think the stability of having familiarity definitely helps to create a bit of a comfortableness too.
I agree totally. We've had different people on bass in the last 10 years. And the people that work best are the ones that fit personally. Bass, obviously there's different levels of requirement there, but if you have a guy that fits and he works with the other members and there's no issues, then there's usually no problem. And that's a big part of it, is getting along.
Yeah, the hang is more important than being able to play Eruption sometimes.
Well, it is.
I don't know, maybe Eruption ain't bad either. Sadly, we'll never hear it done by the original guy again. But,
yeah. Did you ever get to hang out with Eddie Van Halen? I mean, I saw some photos like not long ago, but like, were you ever close with him, or?
Not close, no. I mean, he was
because you're credited as apparently being his favorite guitar player through the 80s.
Maybe he got me mixed up with somebody else. No, I remember that he had said things, but he would come out and he was a fan. He loved Bryan. He loved his voice, and he was always so great. He was just a normal guy, and he didn't really just, what are you using? What's up there? So just this, but he was just really cool. And I did hear about the comment in a publication, and he just said something about me. I thanked him for that. I think at the time, which is the '80s, late '80s. So
yeah.
But he's just a really nice guy, and obviously you're a little intimidated because of his role in electric guitar in the last 40 years or whatever. So,
right.
Yeah.
Keith Scott being intimidated by Eddie Van Halen. Jeez.
Well, seriously. Well, you have to remember at that time, the late 70s, early 80s, and that was all coming to bear again. And people were saying in the late 70s, oh, guitar is dead. I remember Bruce Springsteen saying something like that. And no, it wasn't.
Guitar is dead. Rock is dead.
No, and it came back with a vengeance. Things like Ozzy came out with Randy Rhoads and Eddie and AC/DC Back in Black. And it was like, no, it is coming back to get you. And it really did. And it hasn't gone away. You see kids on YouTube 10, 12 years old, and they're absolute shredding it and doing really well. So I guess that's the biggest advantage. There's so much more information available at a younger age as opposed to when we started. We had to skip the record thing to get the notes, but now you got a guy who's written it all out in tab for you, everything you've ever wanted to know. So,
go on Ultimate Guitar and you got every tab you could possibly want.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, so I mean, it's great, and the information is available, and it's inspiring for young players, and it's inspiring as a experienced player to see people embracing it. I mean, the business has changed so much, and you think that would be a deterrent, maybe, but it hasn't.
Yeah,
just wonderful.
I want to do a little bit of a deep dive. Oh yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Hold on. Well, I just want one question on the rocks thing, because So Happy It Hurts is a great rock record, and it's back to that sound that we all love and appreciate. With the success of Everything I Do It For You, and then Heaven, there came a slew of slow ballads. Please Forgive Me, All for Love. Have you ever wanted to? At some point, was it chasing a trend or sort of chasing the hits instead of writing what was sort of genuinely in the heart, or was that artistically what he wanted to do and what the band wanted to do? Because it just seemed, from my perspective or the fan perspective, is that it's like, oh, it's another ballad. Oh, it's another ballad. Oh, it's another ballad.
Because Mitch hates ballads, by the way.
I don't hate ballads, but I do blame ballads. See, everybody says Nirvana killed the hair metal, and I always say no, it's the power ballad, because people forgot. Motley Crue wasn't rocking anymore, and fans wanted a rock band.
I just think most artists have to learn to adapt, and whatever's available for you at the time. If that becomes a success, then you try to embrace it, and whether it's ballads or if it's electronic music, it doesn't matter. You kind of learn to roll with the punches. But you're right, in the early 90s, the Nirvana record basically erased the memory of all the 80s stuff in one fell swoop. So hence you got a record like 18 Till I Die, which going from more of a Britpop sort of guitar sound and things, which
I've been listening to that record a lot lately, by the way. It's one of my favorite records still right now.
Okay, cool. But I think the ballad thing, it was a formula that Bryan liked to do, because he had two other people involved in it, Michael Kamen being the most important, because he initiated the melodic thing. He was involved because those, save for Please Forgive Me, which was basically a Mutt idea. The other ballads, the Spanish Song and All for Love, initiated as themes from a film. So they took those themes and wrote a pop song, which never wound up being a ballad, because that's what did well with film. To get the song on the film, it had to be that kind of format. So it was just another way to get your message out. And we can look back in hindsight and say, well, there's a lot of ballads. Because that's kind of what was working for that artist at the time, and you couldn't get a 80s sounding rock song on the radio. I mean, it had to be Britpop or Nirvana. It was completely shifted in the 90s. Kind of chasing that, you would have wasted your time. So just do what you're strong at, and I guess there was no real formula. It was just doing what you thought was right at the time.
I want to do a bit of a deep dive in your work with Mutt Lange. Waking Up the Neighbours is one of my favorite records of all time. And last time I interviewed Bryan in Montreal, he was telling me some crazy tales about writing with Mutt in the studio. And just like the stories about, like recording Not Guilty and him just dumping the entire verse because he didn't like the verse, and recording backing vocals. What was the guitar process like for that record? Because we've had Phil Collins from Def Leppard on the show a bunch of times, and he's told us some amazing stories about, the one string at a time stuff, which is like whatever. But like, what were some of the most like bizarre or scenarios that Mutt put you through when you were recording that record?
First of all, I have to say nothing but glowing things about Mutt.
Yeah. Oh no, this is the We Love Mutt Lange show. So none of that.
Because a lot of the urban myth I've heard has been how difficult it's been. And he reiterated stories about working specifically. Well, there's a long story about drummers, but I won't get into it. But
we all know that it was the Fairlight and everything, the programming and everything on the records. And,
it was a Lynn machine because he had real issues with the guy. It's a long story, but I guess the drummer in Foreigner at the time, he and him had sort of issues about how to approach the sound, and he the drummer in Foreigners, Dennis Elliott, is a terrific drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a certain sound. He's a kind of a jazz guy. And Mutt said, no, I'm looking for more of a big rock sound. And he didn't want any part of it. So I think Mutt at the time told me, he said, I just said, I'm going to move on. I'm going to use a drum machine. They figured out how to make it sound more like a rock drummer. So
yeah,
from that point on, Cards, AC/DC, of course, was a band. He just sat there and recorded them according to him. So they had their own swing, and
yeah,
they are who they are, and it's unbelievable. So, but he had kind of made a thing about he wasn't going to use a real drummer. So there was that, and other urban myths about the one string at a time, which I don't think they ever did. It was a myth, But if I talked to Phil, which I have, and he said, I don't think that happened. But it wasn't really anything out of the ordinary, save for that Mutt has a certain sense of swing.
Mm-hmm.
And we, of course, Waking Up the Neighbors was a drum machine. And save for Mickey playing cymbals on it. But,
yeah, Mickey said he sat there with basically a drum kit of just cymbals and was just hitting cymbals. And they would just use like decays of the cymbals, like at the end of snare hits and like different stuff.
Exactly it. They had it. The drums were programmed. It was more of an added on to give it more realistic thing. Because when we went to go play at a band, we were a band. We weren't a drum machine. We had to make it more like that. So, and when it came to the mixing stage, that hopefully helped. But anyway, the process for guitars wasn't any really different from what we had gone through. It was just way more work because there was so many more ideas. Like the songs on there, I swear we would spend a week just doing the one track. Bryan had already put his rhythm track. I would go and put my rhythm track and then add a whole bunch of other stuff, swells and little melodic bits and jangly bits. And Mutt would be writing them at the time. So we'd be he'd have a guitar and say, try this. Okay, let me change this. And we record it. We got to change this note. So that process alone, creating the part, just took ages. And the fact that we were out in his studio in the country, there's some distractions, people coming by to visit, or there was deer in the garden or something, but the process, it just took forever, but it wasn't like overbearing. It was just, we knew it was going to take time.
Well, Bryan describes it as he's not a taskmaster. He's just genuinely trying to get the best performance out of you possible. And it takes time to get that.
That's so true. And I've never met anybody that had such a focus. And there was one track on that record, Vanishing. And we'd gone, I thought, wow, this is really cool. And he goes, there's one more thing I want to try. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you cannot fit another part on this track. You're crazy. In my mind, I'm thinking that. And he goes, just try this. Of course, I play it and it's like, it's genius.
Right.
I never argued with him. I just did it. And I was always so pleasantly surprised what he would come up with. All his, this guitar solo bits that he would help me with. He always had a plan, but I had to kind of decipher what that was after several months. I think I went from July to Christmas of 1990 and went home for Christmas, came back, and then we went to March. And so I was probably there not quite a year, just doing my parts.
Yeah.
Just before Christmas, the engineer was driving me back from the studio to my place in London, and I had a particularly rough day playing, and I just said, I'm not getting it. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I've been here 5 months and I'm not even close to being done. He said, you're going to be out of here in a few months. Phil took 2 years to do his part for Def Leppard. You're going to be out of here. Don't worry. Nothing against Phil. It's just they had way more going on for them. That it was way more guitar things.
Yeah.
They took their time. I think.
It's interesting we're talking about Mutt's approach to guitars and arrangements. I mean, from what I've understood and listened to his arrangements and work, it seems like he works in frequency. So when you said he'll come up and say, "Oh, just add this," well, there's no way you can fit another guitar part on that. But then if it fits in a certain frequency, it'll fit. And it's almost like that's the way he writes. Did he have a scientific approach to the guitar arrangements, or?
If anybody has science, it's him. And nobody else. Everybody else is kind of guessing. Nothing against everybody else. I mean, Clear Mountain was unbelievable. And Bob, of course. Bob Rock. But Mutt is another level entirely. I've never seen it in another musician or human. And it's not just about his music. It's about him as a person as well. He is at another level. It's incredible. It changes your life as a human being and a musician. and you embrace things that you normally wouldn't have thought of. And I just respect him so much in every capacity, and the things that he has done for me on a personal level, on a musical level. And it really is a special thing to be introduced and to be able to work with somebody in that capacity. And I've worked with some really great people. As I mentioned, the first guy I ever recorded a real record was with Bob Clearmountain. I mean, oh my gosh, he was the man in the 80s across the board. So, and is still so relevant, in every way. So the people, I was lucky enough to be introduced to really great people from the beginning when I was a kid. All the musicians I worked with as a young man, and I was always a lot of focus, and I was a lot of positives. It wasn't like bands beating each other up in the back of the van or anything like that. It was like I always had really great experiences. Good karma. I don't know what it is, but by the time I got to Mutt, I had to be ready, and all those people ahead of him, and just being able to work with someone like that and have some kind of success. I can't even explain it. It's such a blessing. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Would you say that Mutt made you a better player? Did he make you?
Absolutely. And I don't think just a player. I think it's being a player is just one aspect of your life. Being a human being, you have to kind of embrace a lot of things, and it dribbles into your music, and just having that experience from him and the knowledge of how things work. You say it's a frequency thing. That's one part of it. He would dial in things. I remember we had this one guitar which did most of the work. It's Brian's 62 Strat. And it had this nasty kind of, and he would always talk about it. Mutt would talk about it. He said, it's got this nasty thing. And they would spend an hour or two just notching out this nasty thing around just under a few thousand cycles. And I said, I've never seen anybody do this. But when he did it, and I said, I don't understand why that's so important. He goes, because that sound interferes with the snare drum and the vocal and everything else that's important. And when you dialed it out and they notched this really narrow thing just under 2,000 cycles on the console, and it became this warm, beautiful sound all of a sudden. And he understood that. And I just thought, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Just, things like that. And there was a multitude of things like that.
Do you remember the main guitar rig that was used on that record? Like, was there like a bunch of different amps? Was it a Rockman or?
A lot of Rockman. He loved that. We had a rack mount version that we used. And I know specifically it was 3 amps and that. And he had it on 4 input faders. So it was a Marshall 100 watt, a Vox AC30 from the 60s, and a high watt, a 50 watt head. And we kind of had them all mic'd up with the Rockman. And he would kind of move the inputs around, depending on the sound that he was looking for, and would adjust it. So there's combinations of those 4 inputs. With different guitars, mostly that Strat, a couple of PRSs, Brian's Les Paul.
Was there any Charvels or like anything with like sustainers?
No, nothing like that. We didn't know anything like that. I had a black Charvel, but it just didn't work.
Let me ask you, when he's doing stuff like taking out notches and you're working so meticulously and so minutely, do you ever say to yourself, how the hell are we going to do this live? Like, does playing it live become a concern? Because
it really does. And we had to, rethink it. But we had a really great thing where we started touring off that record in Europe, and Mutt was coming out to the sound checks, and he was kind of guiding us through, okay, I know you can't physically play 5 guitar parts at one time, because that's kind of what existed on some of these tracks, like Not Guilty and all that. And he said, just play the parts that are most memorable to people. Don't worry about the other thing. And the fact that Brian had to sing and play guitar took a lot away, because he couldn't really focus on the guitar part itself. He had to kind of do something, a hybrid of it, to be able to sing and play. I mean, that's hard enough as it is anyway. So outside of using tracks, which we never did, we just had to rethink the song a little bit. And that's kind of what we did. And Mutt came out and helped us with that for quite a few months to say, okay, focus on this, don't do that. And he would have the sound checks and kind of guide us through the tracks to help us. So we kind of rethought everything in that capacity. So
the last song on, I was just going to say, the last song on Waking Up the Neighbors, Don't Drop That Bomb on Me, I still call it the best song that Def Leppard never recorded. That riff, was that kind of a throwaway from Hysteria, or like what's the story with that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I wasn't part of that going together. I just came in and did all the parts after. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. The actual musicality of it, certainly. I mean, Mutt was still sort of involved with them. He had been part of a record called Adrenalize, and
Yeah.
I remember recording with him then, and they were sending over mixes of it because he had been involved in some of the tracking. And okay, I think Phil was actually going there on the weekends and doing stuff there because I used to run into him.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, I think, yeah, there was a little bit of that, and I think a lot of it crept into Brian's music. I have rough mixes of the Wake Up the Neighbors that Mutt made before Bob got involved, Clear Mountain, on the mix side, that you just close your eyes and say, well, it's Def Leppard with Bryan Adams on vocals. I mean, the way the drums sound, the Bee Gees are all right up in your face, and there's huge like that. And
Yeah.
it's impressive. But Bryan didn't want to sound and be accused of trying to sound like that, so he pulled a lot of that back in the mix stage. So hence you got a more Bryan Adams version of that.
Yeah. We need a copy of that record.
I need a copy of Bryan Adams' War Machine.
Yes, will it to me, please.
I will it, because if I put it out, then I would be probably put to death. So there you go.
Yeah, will it to me. I will accept it, and I'll do your eulogy.
Just one thing about your guitar solos, and we talked a little bit at the beginning of how you set stuff up, but I was always told, and I think it was Joe Perry who said, you know what, you have to be able to sing the solo. When you hear, Walk This Way, you hear na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. It's as important as the lyric, it's as important as the song. Is that something is that part of your approach where you just say, people need to be able to walk away and sing this part?
I mean, after the fact, that'd be great. I used to do that. I still do it myself. I can sing guitar solos. When I was a kid, I worked at the night shift on the weekend at Vancouver Press, which was the Province and Sun newspaper, and we used to do this job there. And they relieved the board because it was late at night, and all my colleagues and I, we were music fans and players, and we would sing guitar solos of like Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin to each other as a joke, because if you could do that, that means the solo is memorable. So right. I don't think I consciously ever did that. It wasn't demoed from the original, and it just doesn't happen. Which, like Native Son off Into the Fire,
great song.
A lot of that was from the demo, which I probably did then, yeah. And but I can sing all those parts now because I've been part of that. It's been part of my psyche, I guess, or whatever. And but that's just time, and the fact that the song's been out for a while, or the solo for Everything I Do, which was done really quickly, thankfully, because that song came in at the very end of the session and had a kind of a deadline to do. So that solo was like a combination of Bryan and Mutt and I sitting with the guys from the movie going, we need the song, talking about their racehorses, whatever they were talking about in the control room. And the first part was me, and then Mutt going ba 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 ba, and then da 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 was me, and then Bryan went do do do. So within 20 minutes we had the solo. I played it 10 times, and they picked the best one, and wow, that's kind of what it is. But that's rare from Mutt. Normally, it take a couple of days to do a solo. You just work to try to get something that meant something, But that became a signature thing. The success of the singles didn't hurt it. So, but if it was a backtrack in an album, nobody would care. But the fact that it was popular, I guess, made it memorable.
What was the biggest difference between the recording process for Waking Up the Neighbors versus 18 Till I Die? Because it was a dramatic shift. It was like computer, and then it was like band.
Well, we didn't have a computer for Wake Up Neighbors. It was recorded on digital tape, but it was all done on the fly. So you had to punch in. And that was what took all the time. And like I say, I had to understand where the swing was that Mutt was hearing with the drum machine. There's a certain way to play that I was not used to. And over time, I finally kind of clicked in, and then became a faster process. But the initial few weeks was, oh my God, this guy, he's on another world. I just not getting it or whatever. And slowly we became accustomed to it, and it worked. But 18 Till I Die, we had Pro Tools. So they could get away, and they could tighten up the drums, and they could, okay, don't worry about the guitar part. We can make it in time with a shift or, the odd thing. You didn't have to actually play it. You could take the performance and make it more where, like I was describing, to where you wanted to hear it. So the process was faster. I think that's what the difference was.
Faster, yeah. Yeah, there's so many great songs on 18 Till. I mean, like, let's make a night to remember. I mean, the solo and like the sound and just like everything about that record. Like, it sounds so like organic. It sounds like you're in the room with the band. Like, was it that kind of thing? Like, was it recorded off the floor or?
No, we never recorded. The only thing we recorded off the floor was Please Forgive Me, and that was done in a studio in Paris.
Yeah, well, you get the music video for it.
And that's exactly how the song came off. So we did several takes of that and did a couple of guitar solos, a couple of jangles, and that was it. And it was myself, Mickey, a bass player from Nashville, Hutch Hutchinson, David Page from Toto on piano, Robbie Buchanan is an organ player, Canadian guy, I think he's back in Vancouver now, an acoustic guitar player from Nashville, I forget his name, and this guy Shane Fontaine, who was kind of like a country kind of guy, a jangly guy, and Brian. And that was it. We recorded everything off the floor, and everybody went home after we did all the takes, and I stayed around to record the solo and stuff. But
do you still have that white Strat you used in the video?
Yeah, it's sitting right over there in the corner.
Oh, that's so cool.
There you go.
Hang on a sec.
Please forgive me.
Mitch, he's got the white Strat. It's like one of my favorite guitars ever. Do you know that music video actually has like over 500 million views on YouTube? It's one of the most viewed music videos ever.
Brian,
look at it. Look at that.
So I bought this at the Long McQuaid in 1976, 75.
Long and McQuaid. This is where Jeremy makes an offer. Jeremy, starting offer 10,000. Go ahead.
Oh my God.
So it's got bullet holes. So we got really drunk in Fort St. John, and the guy brought a Winchester, and we shot holes through it. And I said, okay, I got to play this tomorrow.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that is terrific.
And that played on the basic track. And Please Forgive Me. It was probably the last time I recorded. Well, I did some re-records with Brian, but the last time I recorded with it, and we kind of put it away. And
bring it back out.
The solo for Please Forgive Me was Brian's 62 Strats.
Oh, you got to bring that guitar to Montreal. I want to get a photo with it.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I'll bring that with the cassette with Waking Up the Neighbors remix on it.
Yes, I will bring a Walkman and some good headphones and just sit backstage all day listening to it. You can take it home after.
Anyway, so it's still in my life, and it's kind of a memento. My kids will have it, so there you go.
Yeah, that's an awesome guitar, though.
Before we run out of time, I just want to ask you about the period between Reckless and Into the Fire, because it was, of course, pre-internet, pre-YouTube. You came to Montreal and then you disappeared, and then for 3 years you sort of didn't exist because we couldn't just dial you up on a phone, right?
You're talking about after Into the Fire, between them?
No, between Reckless and Into the Fire, because it was a 3-year gap. And, back in the day, you would come to the town, you would tour, and then after that, you sort of didn't exist in our town until the next tour. I'm
going to hopefully I got the timeline right. I think we did Reckless. We played the Forum. The following year, we recorded Into the Fire.
But it came out in 87.
87, and then we didn't go through Canada. Is that correct for them?
No, you did, but I mean, it wasn't like today we're on YouTube. Like right now, if you're on tour, I can just go punch it up and I can see you any night and every night. But back then,
I know that after Into the Fire, there was quite a long time. 88, we recorded. We went over to Europe for, I guess, places like the Middle East and stuff. It's a place we'd never been to before. We went to London and recorded about 8 or 9 songs with Steve Lillywhite, a producer that Brian was considering because Bob wanted to move on. And Brian wanted to try something different. That didn't really pan out. We went back in 89. We re-recorded everything with Bob Clear Mountain again. All these songs that we'd started with Steve didn't really pan out. Mike Fraser came in, Bob Rock came in, and then the following year, the early part of 1990, Brian said, I've talked Mutt Lange into making the next record. So that was 3 years of kind of like idleness, no real touring to speak of. The odd little thing, Bruce would put us on a couple of summer dates or something, but there was really like not the same level of work that we enjoyed. So, but after that, of course.
But I do want to know about, because Reckless was so huge, how intense was the pressure for Into the Fire? I mean, did the record company sit on top of you and go, I don't hear another Summer of 69, I don't hear another, like, were you free to just make the album? Was there a lot of pressure? Did you sense as a band, like, oh boy, if this isn't as big as Reckless, maybe we're, like, because Reckless was so huge.
My sense of it was, while we were making that record, there was a certain amount of songs. Halfway through the recording process, we got offered a tour to Amnesty International. It was 6 outdoor dates, I think.
With Sting, Peter Gabriel.
Sting, Peter Gabriel, U2, who else was there? Joan Baez, Lou Reed. It was the Neville Brothers, a real cross-section of music.
Yeah,
it was great.
Every different place would bring out local people that, Jackson Browne came to San Francisco, whatever. It was all individual. By the time we got to New Jersey, the last show, Miles Davis played that night. Santana was there, all kinds of people. Like, it was amazing. Police reformed for that. Then they'd been out of sorts for quite a while. So I think that experience for Bryan, he could see that there was some kind of like artistic shift going on, and he wanted to capitalize on it and talk about more topical things and songs rather than just what he'd already gone over several times in Cuts Like a Knife and Reckless. Well, how many times can you sing about, your guitar has 6 strings and your girlfriend has left you or whatever, let's move on to more mature themes. I'm in my 30s, blah, 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 blah. So that's the only way I can explain it from his side. Yeah. And him and Jim were starting to hit the wall a little bit on their collaborations. So I think the things were changing. So and as much as I still consider that record my favorite one we ever did. Again,
great. Native Son, remember? I mean, Another Day. If you play that in Montreal in the upcoming tour, I'll thank you forever. It's so great.
It's a nice homage, Indigenous remembrance,
Yeah, and that as well. So there's all that, and I have Indigenous background, so that means a little bit to me. And with the fact that we got to replicate the 3 records in London last month, it was really a triumph for me, because more often than not, records that are 20, 30 years, 40 years old, they don't see the light of day again, and only in small little snippets. And the fact that we were able to reproduce the entire record and the work it took, it was, oh boy, I forgot about that. So it was such a great tribute as to yourself and to everybody and to the music. So I really enjoyed doing that in a really special location like Royal Albert Hall, where it was really intimate and genuine fans of Bryan being there, and they were expecting that. So I think that what a reward to be able to salute the music once again. And there's a good chance that will never happen again. Who knows? But,
were those shows recorded? Maybe we'll get like a 3 CD box set one day.
The last night was, and that was Waking Up the Neighbors. And so some of it was recorded on film, some of it was recorded on tape. We always record everything anyway because of how our setup is.
Yeah.
So we have every night if we want. So it was great. And that specifically Into the Fire, I was really looking forward to that. That's my favorite record that we ever recorded. We recorded that off the floor, and we recorded at Brian's house in West Vancouver. He had a studio console set up in his basement, and Bob was there, of course, Bob Clearmountain. And it was just delightful. It's just one of those things you just think, wow, that's what a great time in your life to have that. And then you have a little audio representation, a snapshot of everything that was going on in your life. And it has a lot of meaning. So I really have a lot of connection to that.
One of my favorite songs at Into the Fire is like on the D side, Hearts on Fire. That riff, that it's so good. How come you guys need to put that into the set list a little bit more?
That whole album needs to be more visible in the set list, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's hard to do them all, though. And of course, the idea is to promote what you've done recently. So obviously we're doing So Happy things, and we're doing 4 or 5 things, kind of switching things around.
Yeah.
And he wants to promote that, and that's the artist's license, and that's great. But, and we have a feature in our show now where fans can come. We start about 3/4 of the way through, and you can request a song from the audience. People bring signs, so there's songs from like 11 where you go, I didn't even miss on that record. It was like whatever, but it just, and you get, oh my gosh, or songs that were from the Jeff Lynne record, or that you just never really listened to, and somebody pulls a sign up and you're sweating and think, okay, what's the chorus?
Somebody's holding up to like This Side of Paradise, and you're like, we can't play that.
But
well, start practicing Remember, because I'll be there with my sign.
Yeah. So, or things from the first record, like. I don't know. So remember we played several times, but win some, lose some, or something from the first record. It's like, what is that? I don't know.
Yeah, but those are just like the fans that are like, oh yeah, I'm an original fan. I'm the real fan. Here's my, Play War Machine.
I think they just do it to see if we can stumble, which we do, routinely.
Yeah. At least you're not up there miming, so that's good.
Well, here, the good thing is that the last album is classic, where he's redone these cuts. So that means we'll hear Teacher, Teacher and Hiding from Love. So that's perfect.
Possibly. We don't know what's coming at any given night. But generally, it's a bulk of Reckless. It's a bulk of Waking Up the Neighbors, a bit of Cuts Like a Knife, and whatever is recent. That's kind of been the template for our tour schedule the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah. I know he does it acoustically.
You never asked about the three-piece era, which went for almost 5 years.
Well, I was going to ask that because Live at Budokan is a great live record. Why did you go to a three-piece?
That was Bryan, and he was going through some personal things with his life, and it was kind of a send-off. I guess just after we did the Unplugged, and he was going through some stuff, and he said, I got to go do these radio shows in America, and I've already promised it, and if I cancel them, it's big radio, and they will never play my music again. So we're going to go on again. They're just private shows, right, for radio before Christmas. Right. And so we went and did them, and he said, just you and I and Mick, we're going to do like half an hour. That's all you have to do. But he loved it. He absolutely loved it. He could be the punk that he always wanted to be, and he has that in him, in his approach. So, and we just kept doing it. He said, I want to try this for a while. I was like, oh, God. You want me to do songs from Wake Up the Neighbors with one guitar? Rethink it, dude. Turn into Pete Townsend, which is kind of what I looked as an idea, but just try to play the melodies and the chords at the same time on the guitar. And he played bass. And hang in there, Mickey. Sorry. And that went for 4 or 5 years until I talked him into getting a bass player, and he went back to guitar, and it became better.
Which is good.
But it was a fun era. I mean, that Budokan album is great.
Yeah, I think for the time, I think every artist can do what he wants. It's up to him. You're not, bound by some invisible contract to be a certain person. Try it and see what happens. 5 years might have been a bit long, but the initial year or so, the first gigs we did was like opening up for the Rolling Stones. I was terrified. So, this is like, I don't know if this is going to work. And we did, because the songs themselves always hold up.
Yeah.
If it's just Bryan by himself with nothing singing, people will come. I mean, guys, the song is, if it's memorable, he has the voice, just him and a guitar. I mean, it doesn't matter. And we become the surrounding. And that's the key. That's something you discover over the years, that the songs become larger than the artists. And that's why you can go see video, or you can go see anybody today that's in their 70s. Maybe they don't have the physical gift anymore like they used to, but the audience hears the song like when they first heard it. Yep. And they're singing it away anyway, and they don't hear you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's something to that. And that's what gives the whole era such longevity to me, that the songs are still relevant. So
yeah, it's almost like you don't even own the songs anymore. It's owned by the world.
No, and Bryan can do something like Bare Bones, and it sounds killer.
Yeah, because the songs are there.
Yeah,
and he can relax and enjoy and sing, and not be singing over crashing drums and a loud guitar player and all this other crap. And he admits that I rediscovered how much fun I had singing doing that. So God bless him.
Yeah.
Here, I'll ask you this as my final question. Okay. You've never done a solo album. Why not? Why not just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go sing and shred and...
I really want to embrace something that is meaningful to me, and I wouldn't just put out a solo record for the sake of doing it, because I don't see the point. The only thing I have done is a tribute to surf music, which was kind of an accident. And I did one about 20 years ago. I did a Christmas one last year. It's been sitting there for years. I just haven't been able to finish it. And I finally did. And then there was a bunch of new material that I'd written like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's ready to be mixed. I just got to get up to Vancouver to do that. I haven't been able to with my tour schedule and that. So,
right.
So there's that. That's the only real solo thing I've done. I've written so many bits I got sitting here that I have to complete. I just have to stick my nose to the grindstone and put it out. But it has to be meaningful. Bob Rocca's grinding me to do something next year because he's busy and I'm busy. But we're going to get together and use people that we know and love and do some stuff. Cause
it'll be the new payolas.
Yeah, no, it'll be more guitar, like blow by blow kind of thing, you know.
Yeah,
because that's what we love, and we want to go back to that. So.
Here,
We're always going back.
and my final one, just in terms of loyalty, Bryan, of course, has stuck with you, but you've, of course, stuck with Bryan because you're Keith Scott. I'm sure you've gotten calls from people like Sting or Peter Gabriel or so who say, "Hey, come be in our band. Come and be in the Ringo Starr, and you haven't.
No.
Were you getting a lot of offers?
No, I in the 80s when I was more visible and reckless and all that, it was more, but I think it's a different business now, and people like to do things quickly and efficiently and the least amount of expense because they don't have the budgets anymore. And that's a really big consideration. So, I mean, I don't have my rate is this or anything like that. It's just about what's convenient. And even the things with Jan, which were over 10 years ago now, I mean, that was great for Bob and it worked because Bryan had gone by himself for a while, but it's more prudent for them to use a local person that you don't have to fly in and all that and put them in a hotel and just use the people that are available. The music doesn't require what I sort of have learned to do. So it has to be a specific kind of artist and a specific kind of music that warrants my involvement.
Yeah.
So
Like
I don't go out. I'm not interested in going out and soliciting that. I'd rather work on something on my own that I know is meaningful for me. At this point in my life. So,
well, I know who I'm hiring to put some grease on my record, hitting up Keith Scott.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Hey, one last question before you go. I'd be doing a disservice to my Britney Spears fans out there because I'm a big Britney fan. Talk about Don't Let Me Be the Last to Know and how that song came about really quickly.
Well, it's a long story, honestly, but that is, again, Mutt Lange. And the story is we were doing overdubs in France for 18 Till I Die, and Mutt was working on an edit. And I was sitting behind him and I was playing this chord scale up the neck, and he stopped and he turned around and he said, "What is that?" I said, "That's just something I just been working on." It says chord scales. That was it. And several months later, the record was out, and he actually phoned me in West Van and he said, "Hey, that idea you were playing it was like a year ago." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "It was a thing you played, and I used it for this Britney Spears song that we wrote for Shania, but we gave it to Britney. So I'm giving you a songwriting credit." And I went, "Well, I didn't have anything to do with the song." He goes, No. And this is part of my and being a writer and having all the obstacles as a writer when he started and the people trying to steal from him and all that, which he considers a no-no. And he said, "No, this is how it is. And you did something and I'm going to reward you for it. I'm going to give you credit for it because without that part, the song isn't right."
Yeah.
So that was his whole initiation, and he included me on that. And that was her biggest record. So, I mean, it was so sweet of him to do that, but not necessary. Nobody else would have done that. So, but that's the difference between a Mutt Lange and maybe somebody else. So,
wow.
It's a human thing.
What was the part? Was it the like what was the part that you were playing?
It was just a climbing sort of chord part in the second verse. It was just this thing I just add some major chord scale, but you add the 9 all the way up. And has a certain sound when you use the open strings, and he thought that was really cool and he used it. So, but it's just remarkable that he would do that. I'm always it's just one of many things, really. I'm just really we did this whole new thing virtually here. Mutt was in Switzerland, Bryan was in Vancouver, everything was locked down. We used a special software where I could run Pro Tools and we could all hear it simultaneously, and we would do all my parts here. Bryan was listening to everything and suggest things in Vancouver. Mutt was recording it all in Switzerland. And that's how we got all the guitar parts done for Happy It Hurts, which was like 4 or 5 tracks that I was part of. So,
yeah.
He's just amazing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's just something else. So,
absolute legend,
I have a lot of respect for him.
Well, Bryan Adams, So Happy It Hurts. You can pick it up now wherever you get your music. Going to be hitting the road. Make sure you pick up your tickets. I'm calling it, screw the stadium tour, screw everything else. That Bryan Adams tour is just going to be absolutely epic. Just so much fun every time. You just can't go wrong. Make sure you get your tickets, evenko.ca, also ticketmaster.ca. And I was going to say buy the VIP packages, but you guys don't do that. You don't milk the fans.
Well, I think we're changing this trip.
Oh yeah,
he's normally has a GA audience because he likes the excitement, but they're starting to see that it's probably not the most prudent thing. So I think he's changing this.
Well, that'll be awesome. Either way, we'll see you in Montreal this September. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. I have a lot of friends there, and big shout out to my friends at Premier Music, Gino and the gang, who have been so great to us through all they do as far as publishing and neighboring rights and all that. They've been just a force for so many people, so many friends, and I just love them to death. They're great, like family for me. So I'm looking forward to seeing them too.
Awesome. And Corey and I will have to come out to the show and say hi.
He connected with me yesterday or 2 days ago and said hi. He's a great guy and a great player. And he said he's working with Michael Pagliaro. Is that right?
Yeah, Michel Pagliaro.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's been doing that, and he's a gifted guy. He's cool. Well, please give him my regards.
Yeah, I grew up with him. He's literally my neighbor. He lives like 2 houses down. He does all my guitar work for me. I texted him. I was like, yeah, I'm interviewing Keith Scott. And the first thing he asked me, he's like, do you know Corey?
Yeah. No, he's a great guy. We got to, he did some dates with us in Quebec a few years back. So
yeah,
awesome.
Great guy. There you go. Merci bien. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Tous les ans.
The Mitch Lafon and Jeremy White Show.
The Mitch Lafon and Jeremy White Show.
Available wherever you stream.
Catch up on past interviews and episodes on demand now.
Subscribe so you don't miss any of it.